Disclaimers. 1. The content shared in this podcast is strictly for informational purposes and should not be construed as financial or legal advice. 2. The opinions expressed by the hosts and guests are solely their own and do not represent the views of their employers or affiliated organizations. 3. None of the projects or companies discussed should be considered as endorsements or recommendations. 4. While efforts are made to ensure accuracy, the information provided may not always be up to date or entirely reliable. It is advisable to conduct independent research and seek professional guidance before making any financial or legal decisions. 5. The hosts and guests of this podcast shall not be held liable for any consequences or actions resulting from the use of the information provided. 6. All content, including text, graphics, and audio, is protected by copyright laws. Unauthorized reproduction or distribution is strictly prohibited. 7. Any discussions on sensitive topics aim to foster inclusivity and respectful dialogue, but differing opinions should be expected and not attributed to the podcast creators or sponsors. 8. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge and agree to these disclaimers, and you are responsible for your own interpretation and application of the information presented.
Hey folks, how's it going? Welcome back to the Intersection4 podcast. This is episode 7. I am back after a hiatus. It was a really good hiatus. I spent a long time in the Oregon coast with my girlfriend, just chilling and reflecting on life and the future of humanity. But we're back with your usual 3 hosts. We have a founder, we have an investor, and we have me, a dev, an engineer, a product person, a technologist. And we have 2 topics for you guys today. We have 2 things that we want to talk about today. One is a really interesting trend that the 3 of us are observing across media, across just the internet in general, and the public narrative surrounding longevity and health and longevity technology. And then the second one is about blockchain, yet again, but this time focus on institutional adoption. There's been some interesting news lately that we're going to present in a second. But those are the 2 things that we want to talk about today: longevity and blockchain and institutional adoption of crypto. Where do we want to start?
Let's start with the more interesting and the less, traveled topic.
Longevity.
Okay, so I'm guessing that's longevity.
Yes.
Okay, so let's start. I'm going to share my screen real quick. So this is the topic that I proposed for today. I have personally, as part of my hiatus, I spent a long time looking a lot at health tech, longevity tech, and the science of longevity overall. And when I say longevity, I feel like there's a bad rep to this word. When I say longevity, a lot of people think about billionaires who are trying to live forever. But at a very foundational level, it's just how do you build a healthy life so that you can both live longer and live better, right? So the distinction between lifespan and health span doesn't really matter if you live to 100. If at 80, you're basically incapable of living a healthy and fulfilling life. And similarly, I would much rather live to 85 and live until my 84th year being very capable of being alive, as opposed to living to 100 and having 20 years of not enjoying life to the fullest. So at a more fundamental level, longevity means living longer and living better. And it's been really interesting that the internet, and especially technology circles lately, have been starting to talk significantly about this topic. There's been a few books that recently came out. This one perhaps being the best example is #1 New York Times bestseller called Outlive, The Science and Art of Longevity by medical doctor Peter Attia. He has a really interesting background. I just finished reading this book. Another book that I'm currently reading is a bit older by David Sinclair called Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. The Science of Aging and the Science of the science of aging and health, like why do we age at a molecular level. And of course, we also have a really good example, and perhaps I stopped sharing my screen. We also have a really good example and perhaps the most kind of out there example of somebody pursuing longevity, which is Brian Johnson, which a lot of these folks may be familiar with. He was the founder of Braintree Venmo, which is a company that acquired Venmo and later on sold it to PayPal. He made, I think, $800 million in the sale, multimillionaire, and now he's spending $2 million a year to basically optimize his health to live forever. I wanted to set the discussion playing field. Brian Johnson particularly, has been perhaps the biggest proponent of this longevity movement to an extreme. If you look at his videos and you look at the way that people react to it, there's usually hostility. But it's just interesting to see how tech is starting to look again at longevity. And I have a few thoughts to share on this, but I spoke for a long time. I'll pass it on to you, Brandon, and James. Initial thoughts on this. What are your thoughts on Brian Johnson, on the longevity movement, on some of these books that I mentioned as well?
Yeah.
I have another type of question. So, why do you feel that people are hostile against, somebody who's just trying to live a better life? Like, I understand that there's some newer techniques and there might be some new technology involved, but isn't it just, every human's right to be able to live a more healthier life and try to live for longer? Like, what is so dramatically different than me going on a exercise regimen or me taking supplements? It's really quite similar, and a lot of the technology that goes into supplements today, or any of these things, might have started off as a crazy idea just like
Yeah.
this.
Brandon, what do you think?
Yeah, it's just tough because I think we've built our healthcare system, not just like the facilities and the actual like physical system, but also like the morality behind our healthcare
Mm,
system is fixing people that are at a detriment rather than like trying to accelerate people who are already in a good position. So I think there's like always like a kind of a wincing feeling when you hear
mm,
these kinds of Brian Johnson stories. Um, I'm kind of the not a great poster child for this because I read the David Sinclair book 4 or 5 years ago. I went vegan. I started taking NMN and have been on it every single day for at least 4 years. So I'm like a huge proponent. I
mm,
think the way that Brian Johnson does it is a bit of a shock and awe factor. That is like I similarly agree it could be a bit off-putting. But I think like the general consensus is like this is probably the direction we're going. People are taking different paths to get there. Exciting place. I think like a more natural progression is less of like the Brian Johnson approach, but more similar to if you're a user of Whoop or Levels for glucose monitoring or the Aura Ring. These are much more approachable, life expanding technologies that don't feel as invasive as a $2 million per year regimen, but more, hey, you should be getting more sleep. Hey, you should be working out today. Hey, you should be standing up through your Apple Watch. That seems a bit more realistic. Have you guys tried any of the supplementing or the regimens, Hamiz?
Yeah, I actually want to also address your question, James, as to why I think people are hostile to this. I do think Brian is a really good example of everything you're mentioning, Brendan, of doing this to the extreme. But I think it's good to contextualize to people who may not be familiar with him how far to the extreme he takes it. So this is a video. I think the best way to look at all of this is just his YouTube channel. This is a video of his usual diet. He has a healthy diet, of course. He exercises, of course. He sleeps well, of course. He sleeps actually very, very well. I'm envious of his sleep. He has like 100% quality sleep
mm,
pretty much for like, he's been having 100% quality sleep for the last 3 months, which
Yeah.
is insane. We can talk more about it in a second. But for example, he takes 100 plus pills every single day. 100 plus pills, supplements, multivitamins. He takes some testosterone hormones as well. So it's like it's quite to the extreme. And the cool thing too is that he experiments with this.
mm,
In fact, if you just look up, if this is the first time that you're either hearing about Brian or you might have heard about him before, you probably heard of um, this thing that he did a couple um, weeks ago. And let me just share this tab real quick. um, Millionaire biohacker Brian Johnson defends ball plasma transfusion with his son. So one of the most out there things that he did is that he basically did um, an intergenerational plasma transfer. So his son, who is 17, transferred plasma to him, and he transferred plasma to his father. And of course, this was like extremely out there. I have the personal thought that this may be this was a marketing stunt, but
mm,
it's just like it's really out there things, right?
mm, mm,
So the default reaction of people when they see this is, oh, this is odd, this is weird, this is like not right, this is not the way that humans are supposed to operate. But I think the very foundational reason why people are by default upset to his reaction to his work is that we live in a society in which health advice is very simple. It's just eat well, exercise well, and maybe even just that, like people don't even talk about the importance of sleep in normal society. But we live in a society in which we're all kind of collectively both ignoring the fact that we're all going to die, ignoring the fact that we're all getting older, and we're also fooling ourselves, if you may, that we are living a healthier life than we think we are. And when you see and when you look at somebody who's taking this to the other extreme of being extremely healthy, possibly as healthy as he can, as a human being can be, and definitely like a human being in his age and with his characteristics, people realize actually how unhealthy their life is, and that upsets people. And that is the reason why people, in my opinion, that is the reason why people look at him and are like, I don't like that. That's bad. That's wrong. Because
Interesting.
it makes them see how unhealthy their habits are. When you realize they just ate 3 donuts today, and in those 3 donuts are probably the same amount of calories that he eats in a single day, you realize, oh, I don't like you because you're making me realize how unhealthy I am. When they realize they're sleeping like crap, they're sleeping like 5 hours a day, that they are addicted to caffeine, that they drink alcohol like 4 times a week, and then that has a huge weight on their caloric intake. When they see those things, either unconsciously, the default reaction is hostility towards somebody who's trying to pursue the best version of themselves.
Hmm. Hmm.
Miss,
Okay.
do you agree?
Okay. That's. I think I'm sure there's a lot of that. I think it might also stem from the fact that he is a rich white male, right? And so people just see the contrast, right? Like they see people who have the most basic, medical care in the world, which is the vast majority of people, and then you have the, absolute extreme, which is $2-3 million a year or whatever, the regimen costs. And so I think it comes maybe from the place of unfairness, right? And when things feel unfair, people generally, oppose them, or also when things feel excessive, people also oppose them, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I think if he wasn't a billionaire, I think if he was a monk, right, who was living, it would have been seen as, oh, this is this great, thing coming out of the monasteries about how you can improve your life. But because he's a, millionaire, billionaire, I don't really know, it comes from a different place, and it gets attached to a different type of personality.
There was also controversy in his like previous relationship and some other
yeah,
factors that I
yeah,
think
yeah, yeah.
layer in. I think the reason that like I'm interested in also looking elsewhere is like he's N of one. He's a great poster child for like what's possible. But like when an Aura Ring or Whoop puts out a report and they say like there's 100,000 people that back up this claim, that's more
Mhm.
interesting from like a how do I want to change my like lifestyle because there's enough data points. Those are quite exciting as well.
Yeah. Let's go deeper then. I think Brian is the tip of the iceberg on longevity. And I think that's what most people see. And that's why usually longevity has a bad rep. Because they look at him and all these things that we discuss as to why people feel hostile, and they're like, I don't like that. I don't want to deal with that. I want to live my life the way that I live it. But again, to your point, Brandon, he's the N of one. He's going to the extreme. Maybe you don't have to go that far to actually reap all the benefits or the vast majority of the benefits from like just living a healthier life altogether. So if we go deeper down, what are some of the technological changes that we are seeing around longevity and health overall?
Yeah.
And just one quick comment that I've noticed is he spends $2 million per year on his health. And I think the vast majority of that money goes into measurements, because what he's doing different than most people is, of course, he has really good habits, but he's not the first person who eats, sleeps, and exercises well. I think what he's doing differently is that he claims to be the most measured man in history. He's spending millions of dollars in nearly daily measurements. And of course, the vast majority of people don't have $2 million to be able to have such a close look at all of their biomarkers. But there's a lot of technology that is emerging for normal people, like just normal people, middle class people. Of course, it's not yet publicly available to everybody in the world, to start keeping better track of their biomarkers. And Brandon, you mentioned Whoop, you mentioned your Apple Watch. Can you talk a little bit more about some of those health devices that you're seeing around, and what is exciting about them and how they work and what's all this for?
Yeah, yeah. I'll actually show quickly this tab. So this just came out actually this week, I believe, or kind of last week. It got like a bit more popularized. But there was a meta review of a number of different wearables tracking systems. And I think one of the claims that are being made is like by tracking activity, does it lead to better outcomes? People losing weight, like walking around more, eating less. And like this quick summary for folks who don't want to read this entire paper is like, yes, it does on a number
Mhm.
of kind of like measurements. So I think that's the exciting part is that like just by measuring, you're either directly or indirectly going to be walking more. And for me, I've tried Whoop for a year. I just got Oura Ring. I've had an Apple Watch, and I think like across the board, each of those sees themselves as like one kind of data point. The other one is the what's the bed one that everyone's using nowadays? Eight sleep.
Whoop too, no? Oh, eight sleep. Yeah,
Eight
yeah, eight
sleep. Yeah, I
sleep.
think
Yeah.
eight sleep is like the you can actually just track your sleeping on your bed. Um, and it's funny to think that I remember hearing someone say in like the last 10 years, there's been four mattress billion-dollar startups. And like I think why is
That's
that?
really interesting.
I think it's
Yeah.
because like at the end of the day, sleep is such a massive part of your life,
Mhm.
and there is
Interesting.
like actually a billion-dollar problem to be solved there.
Yeah.
I think this underpins. This is really interesting. I have a couple directions that I want to take this. I think this underpins a a bigger theme about the way that the healthcare system works that you were alluding to at the beginning, Brendan, which is and Peter Attia in the book that I shared at the beginning called Outlive talks a lot about this. Kind of analogous to how we have Web 2 and Web 3. He also talks about Medicine 2, Medicine 2.0, and Medicine 3, Medicine 3.0. Medicine 2, which is the current healthcare system that we have, is interventionist. They intervene when there's something wrong.
Mhm.
And because of that, we became really good at treating trauma. And by trauma, I mean like physical trauma. You break your arm, crap. Like if you broke your arm, like I don't know, say 1,000 years ago, you could have very genuinely like died just because you're extremely incapacitated. Um, if you had an infection, for example, you could very realistically die up until like 100 years ago. Um, but now anything that is trauma based, we have pretty much taken care of it. The problem though is that the tail end of our lives tends to be filled with diseases that are not trauma based diseases. Namely, in the book, Peter talks about four main horsemen of death. He talks about cancer, cardiovascular disease, dementia, and metabolic disease. So type 2 diabetes and other metabolic disorders, dementia like Alzheimer's, Parkinson, etc., cancer, of course, and then heart attacks, strokes, and things related to it. And those usually, when you take an interventionist approach to those four horsemen of death, it's usually way too late. He jokes in the book, but he mentions a common joke in medical school where people say that the first symptom of a heart attack is death, because when you realize that you're having a heart attack, you're dead. And usually, a heart attack is not a sudden thing. The impacts and the symptoms are sudden, but those things have been developing for years on end. And we still haven't evolved our healthcare system to be one of preventive care. We are still interventionist care. And what better tracking and better biomarker monitoring shows is us humans trying to evolve the way that we take care of our bodies to be more preemptive and proactive as opposed to reactive.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's. I think there's a lot of uh, positive developments like in the future on the backs of like very simple things that I think most people take for granted today. So I don't think we'll ever be able to get, not ever, but I don't think in the near future we'll be able to get the $2 million a year type of measurements for the masses. Right? Like that's just going to be so difficult to deliver to 8 billion people. But delivering a smartphone or a smartwatch to 8 billion people, that actually is possible, right? Like that's something that is reasonable over the next 100 years, that every human has some smart device on them, or close to it. And I think what will happen is when we have that massive data, we actually will need less precise instruments to be able to detect things, because you'll be able to, for the first time in history, be able to take data from millions and millions of people, billions of people, and be able to find patterns in there that were just not possible unless millions of people were going into the doctor and getting these daily readings, right? So I think there's going to be some very interesting like data science that will improve outcomes for everybody, and actually do it with devices that might be already on people. Like, what if there was a way to take data from your, just the way you walk, right, in your pocket on the phone? If there was enough data, what if there was a way to find a pattern on you have a high risk of heart disease because of the way, the pace, the
Yeah.
stride of your walk, right? We can't do that today because we don't have the data, but if we had the data on 8 billion people, I think we'll find patterns that we never thought were possible, and actually take a $2 million a year uh, cost and bring it to the masses.
Yeah.
There's I just looked at the numbers on this. There's some interesting precedent here. The genome sequencing project, which took 10ish years, completed in 2003, cost in today's dollars 5 billion to do one human genome. In 2021, the cost is well below 1,000.
Mhm.
We have the
I just
23
sequenced my
andme.
genome for $800.
Yeah,
I just sequenced my whole genome for eight
there
hundred
you go.
dollars.
So I mean, just like think about that, 20 years, and we went
Yeah,
from 5 billion to under a
to
thousand. So to
100,000.
your
It's like
point,
Moore's law.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
It's like Moore's law. Yeah, for genetics.
If only we
exactly.
had a company that could prick your finger and take a little drop of blood.
I was literally gonna say this. I
Yeah.
was literally gonna say this. Actually, no, I was literally gonna joke about this. It's
Uh,
really interesting because this is reminding me about Theranos all over again,
yeah.
all over again. But it's super fascinating. Actually, I was watching Rick and Morty yesterday, and I got an ad. I was watching it on Hulu, and I got an ad for Q Health. So for those who are not familiar, let me show you here.
Mhm.
Um, Q Health is a company that does. Let me first show you the company. Um, Q Health is a company that does at-home testing. They have this little machine, which is a Q. I don't know how they call it. Is a Q deck or the Q dock or something like that? But
Mhm.
it's basically the machine itself that they sell. It's hardware. They have an app and they have different cartridges, or this is a really hard word to say in English. They have little pouches that do different types of tests. So I got one of these during COVID
Mm.
for COVID tests. They actually, in fact, went public um, right after COVID. So I think they went public around tail of 2021 because they were a huge hit
Mhm.
during COVID. I think COVID was either the first or one of their first products of tests that they could do at home. The stock hasn't been performing that well ever since, but I think it's really interesting to see that there's companies, public companies, that are starting to bring these ideas of Theranos to you in a way that I mean works. I've taken tests with them, mainly COVID tests, but I still have this machine at home. Whenever I feel like I may have COVID symptoms, I just go in and take it. But they have a bunch of different interesting tests as well. So just a good example of maybe Theranos was just like 20 years earlier,
Too early.
and or at least the concept, right? The concept was just 20 years earlier, and here we are
Yeah.
all over again, kind of like seeing
Yeah,
the
yeah.
same
All the
thread.
technology, it always feels like that, right? Like, if you ask your parents, when I gifted my dad the Apple Watch, and I started to explain to him what it could do, it would have been, if I had shown that to him 50 years ago, he would have thought it was magic, right? Like that it could handle all those things in a device like that. But I think that people like Brian that really push these things to the edge are necessary guinea pigs, right? Because if they're not going to, you need the extremes. You need somebody who's willing to inject himself with these things, right, and do it publicly, so that he's not like, it's not just him benefiting from it, but everybody's benefiting from it, right? So
Yeah, I'm a big fan of
yeah.
Brian. Big fan.
So like, regardless of how he does it or what he does, if after 100 experiments he even finds one that actually is effective, right? Like, he's done something for society
For
by
sure.
doing it publicly, by doing it with his own money. and doing more than most people, even in the public sector, are doing for these types of developments. And so I think that these figures are necessary, and these people are pushing things forward. Maybe the fear is that it's pushing it in an unnatural way. That's also one reason that people are like push against unnatural things. So obviously there's going to be fears about changing God's way of running the world, or the way the world runs, and if everybody lives forever, like how do we make that work? How do we spread resources, right? Like there's I think a lot of questions like that. And I'm not so worried about 8 billion people living forever, but I think that it's a concern on the edges, on how the natural order of things will run when we put unnatural things into the mix.
Mhm. I was at a poker night last week, and the guy sitting next to me was talking to me a little about the company he's at right now. It's called Function Health, and he's like halfway into explaining it, and it is word for word the Theranos kind of like pitch
Hmm.
sort of thing. It's not all on one device, but I ended up looking it up later, and effectively they're doing a number of lab tests, providing the insights to users, and then giving them the interpretation or access to folks who can help interpret on their behalf. So just looking at this list alone, I would be interested to know how much of this is covered in the Brian Armstrong. Here's how much he pays to do a number of these outcomes. Because to me, this looks like pretty expansive for $500.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have a friend who's like one of the founding engineers over here right now.
Nice, nice.
One thing that is interesting to highlight, is kind of an interesting take that I have, is um all of this longevity stuff that we're seeing. And let me just show my screen here again. So we have this book, it's a fantastic book. I cannot recommend this enough, and I cannot recommend Peter enough. Like, there's a lot of noise in the world of health and longevity and etc. And I think Peter is really good at being a very good educator on how do you even digest clinical trial data and epidemiological study data. And he's also a really good educator in the sense of being capable to bring really complex topics down to first principles. So cannot recommend this enough. That being said, though, of course, the book went viral. He has been getting a lot of notoriety recently, and clearly he went and created kind of the follow-up program here, which is called Early. It's called Early Health. It's a journey into it's like it's he says it's the closest thing that he can build to accepting everybody into his private practice. He has a private practice, but basically, for those who can't be accepted into the private practice because they can't scale enough, he's starting this program. This program is basically just a series of courses. Um, it's let me just pull up the FAQ. This website is extremely buggy, but okay. The point that I wanted to make is a series of modules. I think they have 12 modules, a couple hours worth of courses. The price point on this is $2,500. It's not cheap, but it's also not extremely expensive. But it's interesting, of course. Like, he's using all of his notoriety recently to capitalize on it
How do you
in an
guys feel?
interesting
How do
way.
you guys
And of
feel about
course,
that?
yeah. So let me just keep going through this. So there's Brian here as well, and then you can see build your autonomous self, shop olive oil, and then Brian just started a company,
Yeah,
or starting a product. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
yeah.
He's starting a product for olive oil, and basically olive oil is a superfood, and then he's starting this product here as well. So I think we're on the verge of a huge speculative mania fueled by longevity, kind of the same way that we had the previous cycles of speculation from the internet, social, mobile, crypto, AI. The next cycle, 5 years from now, it's going to be longevity, because we're getting really close to having health on a pill, or people so advertising health on a pill. I think Theranos was ahead of the curve in terms of like companies or financial schemes, if you may, um, uh, companies like legitimate companies and also financial schemes in the longevity space. But I think we're about to see it very soon, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see something like Theranos, maybe even like worse than Theranos, the same way that we had, like say, like FTX, which with crypto. But beyond the point in case is that I have a very strong opinion that the next speculative bubble and the next hype cycle is going to be surrounding longevity tech because we're advancing. Um, and that's kind of the patterns that I'm seeing. But I'm just concerned, to your question, Brandon, of what do you think about that? I think it's fine to speculate on the internet. I think it's fine to speculate on social and mobile, and all this other speculative manias that we've had so far. But it just feels morally more complicated
Mm-hmm.
to be speculating on human health
Mm-hmm.
and to be building a system in which if you have money, you live better, you live longer, and if you don't,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it will be different. I think it will be different because of what you were just describing. Right? So it will be different because there is an FDA and there are already, watchdogs out there, and people are much more sensitive to ingesting something in their body than what they do with their money, what they do with their, time, their energy. So I feel that that's one of the reasons that it's been, even with Theranos and stuff, right? Like it affected investors, but it didn't affect regular people in the same fashion. And we can say what we want about Theranos and FTX, but the companies you were just showing me, I think that many of those might not have come to this point or might not have started going down that discovery path unless it was for some of these really grand and big failures. I think it puts that question in the right entrepreneur's mind. Hey, what if I did that but did that well? Like what if I did that and did that honestly, right? Because the product market fit was there, right? Like the need was there, the investor interest was there. It was just a bad founder, right? It was a crooked founder. And so I think that if uh, some of these blow ups happened at a smaller scale, it would have captured the imagination of far fewer people. And I think and think FTX and what will come out of FTX will also look similar because people are looking at FTX and saying there's clearly product market fit, right? Like there's something there. It's just run by bad people. So what if we did it in a decentralized fashion? Like what if we did it with no people at all? Right? What if we under promised and over delivered instead of the other way around? And so I think in this case, because of how hesitant people are to expose their health, their bodies, their children, to these things, I think from a consumer perspective, I think it will hopefully have a smaller impact. But from the investor perspective, like it I'm sure can become a bubble, just like all the things you were describing.
What do you think, Brendan?
What I want to get you guys' reaction on one topic that I heard about a few years back,
Hmm.
completely left out of left field. This is
Okay.
some San Francisco stuff. So I had come across an individual who had signed up for a cryogenics company that upon their death will fly private wherever they're at in the world with someone who's like uh, of a medical profession who can cut off them at the head, inject them with cryogenic fluid, and then put them in effectively like a freezer for a certain number of years with like an ability to basically pay off that cost. And I know multiple people who have like bought that service and are paying for it in San Francisco. Um, what do you guys think about that? The legal, just like would you do it? And do you think other people should be allowed to do it? Maybe we'll just ask that question.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think this is really cool. I think this is we're starting to get to the edge of of yeah, like solving human mortality as an engineering problem. How do you get around human mortality? And if you can't, um And if you can't solve human mortality, how do you delay your chances so that you can maybe be part of those who for whom it's solved down the line? I think we're
Would you do it?
I generally believe that we can actually solve mortality. I think we can. I think death may be an actual engineering problem, and I think we are maybe one, maybe two generations away, maybe three, from actually seeing this through. Um, and I wouldn't be surprised if, like, maybe now, maybe 10 years from now, there's going to be humans on Earth that are just not going to die.
Question though, Sam, would you do it? And do you think it's okay for others
If
to
I
do
would
it?
do it,
Like right now, you have the means. Would you sign up for this program?
tough. I think I would. It's interesting because this gets into
Amaze, but what? Quick answer: yes or no?
No.
No. All right, fair enough. I would not
I think this
either.
gets into the
Would
psychology
you
or
do it?
philosophy of teleportation. No,
Yeah. I wouldn't do it
Sam,
because I
go.
think that I think I think my whole life would change if I didn't think there was a time limit, right? Like
Yeah.
everything would
yeah,
change. Like everything about life would change. The way I think about it, the way I live it, the way I have relationships, like everything would change. Like if I had an unlimited amount of time to build a company, if I had unlimited amount of time to spend with my family, right? Like all those things, such a core part of everything that we do is that we have limited time. And if you
Yeah.
change that, you change everything. You don't just
yeah,
change healthcare, you change the stock market, you change people's retirement, like you change everything. And so I think that for me, it would be I don't know what I would do with my life if I had unlimited time.
There,
So yeah.
there's another argument that is less like what would I do, but the
Uh-huh.
other argument is the because people are dying allows for there to be change in society. Imagine trying to convince everyone to change their mind about, I don't know, Jim Crow laws or homosexuality
Mhm.
or the way we treated like women back in like the Middle Ages.
Mhm.
It's easier for people to just see themselves out in a new generation under different ideologies, kind of like make their way. And I think it actually like I think about that a lot. Like if people were around forever, do they not change their minds? And then like we don't
Mhm.
progress as a society and like our views for different
Yeah.
topics. I think that's an area that I think like people passing away, there's some benefit in allowing like new ideas to crop up. Yeah.
I I the point that I wanted to make, that I think I'm trying to control myself not to go down this rabbit hole because it's a really interesting thought experiment. But when I was in college, I wrote this essay. Let me show you.
So you were
Called
like this in college too, Sam?
dude. I've been doing this stuff of like philosophy of tech for a very long time.
Okay.
I wrote this essay called "The Philosophical Impossibility of Teleportation and Mind Uploading." And the argument is basically like, if we had technology to um, upload your mind, freeze yourself after you die, and even teleport, there is very strong logical, philosophical, um, I can't say evidence, but like insinuations that it may not even be you anymore. And we don't know because we know so little about consciousness that you don't even know if you cut your head off and then you were uh, woken up maybe 100 years from now, you don't even know if it's going to be you anymore. The same way that if you go and you teleport from here to say China, you don't even know if the person that's going to come out of that door is going to be you. And not only you don't know, but it's impossible to actually know, and it's impossible for anyone to prove that it's going to be you. But again, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole and explain as to why and the actual nuance of this argument. I'm just going to say, read this if you're interested in this
I love it.
um,
Deep,
thought
Interesting.
experiment.
deep.
Um, Last
For
comment here is, go ahead.
no, I was going to change the topic slightly. If you want to finish.
Yeah. Okay. So last topic on this on the longevity piece is that I think the underpinning of this entire discussion can come back to this essay. This is an essay by Nick Bostrom. Nick Bostrom is a technological philosopher, really smart person, like really enjoyable thoughts. If you kind of enjoy this type of more complex conversations, this this essay is called "The Fable of the Dragon Tyrant." Basically, tells the story of a village that has been struggling with a dragon that eats people every day, and has been eating people for tens of thousands of years. And it's such a consistent thing throughout the generations of the people who live in this village that everybody assumes that getting eaten by the dragon is part of life. Until one day, a couple people start realizing that maybe we can actually kill the dragon, and maybe we can actually build such clever technology that we can actually destroy the dragon and change the life of our village forever. And it's the same thing with death.
Mhm.
Death has been the constant of life for the last 3 billion years. I can exactly remember when life emerged on Earth, but every single thing that has ever lived may well every single thing that has ever lived will die. Some may take longer than others, like a freaking redwood tree in California may take a lot longer to die than us, but that's the end goal of pretty much every living thing, to die. And this essay was one of the first times that I got introduced to the idea that maybe we can engineer our way out of this, and maybe death is an engineering problem.
Yeah,
Yes, we'll see.
I mean,
interesting.
I have a question less crazy for you around venture in this space.
Hmm.
And the first
Hmm.
person that comes to mind, just a quick backstory, is Laura Deming, child
Hmm.
prodigy, was doing basically bioaging at the age of 12 at San Francisco, dropped out at MIT at 14 under Teal Fellow, and then ended up being the founder of Longevity Fund. I just went to their site. I don't see anything besides this like very blank slate. But I have like seen a few companies or funds kind of crop up around this. What is your take from like a venture angle on like being able to have a fund thesis around aging, longevity, or is it just like a fancier way of saying we're a biotech investor, but like we just want to make it more sexy?
Yeah, there's actually not conclusive evidence that hyper specialization works in venture, especially at the earliest stages, because uh, there's so many different cycles that if you're completely out of, let's say, the fintech market in the very early stages and you're like super focused on some other market, the economics of those very early stage investors are the economics of mass, right? Like you have to be in every credible founder that comes to you. Otherwise, you're better off like not being invested at all, because the chances that you'll pick well are actually very, very low in those early stages. So I would be very skeptical of a hyper specialized, very early stage fund. I'd be very skeptical of that, where they deploy a significant portion of their capital like that. Now, what they could do is they could have a smaller portion of their capital deployed in the early stages just to keep the door open, and then they double down as the companies mature. But if I had a pre-seed seed fund that only did within even biotech, a very specific type of biotech, that would just the venture economics are very difficult to make work in those, unless we have bubble like Sam was describing. But what people don't realize is that the investment strategy of a venture fund is obviously a direct reflection of the investment strategy of their investors, right? So the venture fund is looking for product market fit, just like all of their companies are, right? So they're looking for somebody whose problem is that they want exposure to that specific vertical, right? Like we're all also entrepreneurs, right? At the end of the day, we're also entrepreneurs looking for product market fit, and there are investors who do look for solutions like this, who have this problem, and there are investors who are investing vehicles that are evergreen vehicles. So this fund, for example, if there was an early stage longevity fund, might not be a might not find product market fit with individual investors, but it could find product market fit with pensions and endowments, right?
Hmm.
Because their investment horizon is unlimited. Like their investment horizon, if they do their job right, could be hundreds of years. And they are looking for solutions that don't just and the solution is an investment vehicle. They're looking for a solution that doesn't just generate returns over the next couple of cycles, but generate returns for that endowment for the next 100 years.
Yeah.
And that's where some of these vehicles start to become important. So if I pitch to an investor, who's an individual, my investment horizon is 50 years, like there's not going to be product market fit, right? They're not investing for their children. But if I pitch the same thing to a pension fund, it actually could fit right in to the problem that they're trying to solve, which is generating consistent returns over a multi-decade, if not a multi
Mhm.
like century cycle, right? And so this could be a good fit for those guys.
Yeah, makes sense.
What
Beautiful.
about um,
We should.
longevity on the blockchain? I don't know if you guys have heard of this before, but this is actually a really cool DAO. I know several of the members of the DAO. I don't know exactly how much money they've raised. I don't know what they're up to today. I was pretty. I wouldn't say I was pretty involved, but I knew a lot of people that were around Vita DAO in 2021.
Mhm.
But yeah, basically, is a DAO pulled a bunch of money to basically do longevity investment,
Okay.
which is a really interesting use case of crypto, which may be a perfect segue into our next topic. But I think we've been talking about longevity for an hour, so I'm going to propose we punt crypto institutional adoption
That's right.
to the next episode because this was a deep one.
Yeah.
All right, well, folks, thank you for joining us for episode 7 of the Intersection4 podcast. This was fun. This was a cool one. We spent way more time discussing longevity than we expected to because it's such a deep topic, such a rich topic. So, if you want us to go back to this and explore any areas that were left unexplored because we just simply didn't have time, let us know, and yeah, we can come back to this on a later episode. But for now, thank you, Brendan, Hamis, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Good to have you back, Sam.
Good to be back.
Thank you.